and most expansive in Ireland, has long been familiar to generations of holiday makers, both from here and abroad around these parts. In recent times, the town has had a facelift which has given it a whole new lease of life, and the reward of winning the Tidy Towns competition in 1992. I asked Caroline Bowen-Walsh how long this took to achieve.
It was achieved over a long period. Ardmore has been struggling to win the overall Tidy Towns prize for 29 years. We've been really hard at it since 1978 and harder still since 1986. But it was dedication and commitment and hard work, and there is no shortcut.
Do you think now that to begin with you had a lovely town here?
We had a very beautiful old historical village, which we still have from the beginning. But like all old ladies, old ladies improve with some make-up. And Ardmore was given some spit and polish and paint and bright colours and lots of flowers and fountains and flags. And eventually she evolved as the most beautiful town in Ireland.
Have you a good committee around you?
I have a dedicated committee. I don't know what they'd say about their chairman, but I think they're great. And nobody ever says no to me. They've learned that. But they do everything. We do everything together. I never ask anybody to do anything that I would not do myself. And I think that's, you're halfway there if you have that outlook. And then we've had wonderful cooperation from the public authority and from the local county council workers and from the forcemen. And the children have been a tremendous help to us. In 1986, when we won Ireland's Tidiest Village Award.
About to be junked, are taken in here in the raw state and cleaned, planed, patterned and finally fashioned into modern furniture. It is only a handful of men employed, but their work is avidly sought after, and they're a handful less on the dole queue from this small village of Ardmore. And all that from old balks of wood like this, no longer thought to be of any use to anyone. The Clock Gate stands astraddle the main street in Youghal, 10 miles to the west of Ardmore. Its commanding height made it an integral part of the fortifications of Youghal, when the mere Irishry outside these town walls were constantly threatening the rich burghers and merchants within. The most powerful of these was that Richard Boyle, whom we met earlier in Lismore, and who had these almshouses built as part of a strategy for the defence of the vast estates he had bought from Sir Walter Raleigh. This financier and real estate speculator, who made himself rich enough to become Earl of Cork, in a gesture of military shrewdness provided in these houses £5 apiece for each of 6 old decayed soldiers or armsmen forever. These houses, now close on 400 years old, were saved from demolition by an energetic old Youghal society and are now restored for a cultural use, which would surely astonish the money-conscious Earl of Cork. The Youghal Visitor Centre in the Market Square provides a wide range of tourist information, including information about Moby Dick, John Huston's film classic which was shot in the town. Youghal Bridge, across the mouth of the Blackwater, joining Cork and Waterford, is one of the main commercial and tourist arteries of the south. It stands in marked modern contrast to the antiquities of Youghal, including St Mary's Collegiate Church, a gem of architecture, now close on 1,000 years old. The original church, built by the Danes away back in the 11th century, was destroyed in a storm, but was rebuilt 2 centuries later to incorporate the remains of that old building. This lovely stained glass window on the east wall, with the eye of Providence looking down sublimely upon the coats of arms of all the notables of Youghal, is one of the few antiquities not associated with the adventurer Boyle, Earl of Cork, grotesquely reclining in full regalia here beside other members of his family. A weather vane above the nearby house of Sir Walter Raleigh shows him spreading his cloak under the feet of the dubiously named Virgin Queen. The lighthouse above the harbour reminds us that Youghal, not Cork nor Cove, was once the premier port of the south. While Youghal Strand, with its breakwaters running out to sea, is and always has been a favourite resort for day trippers out from Cork. Up to the minute, holiday amenities are constantly being added. The latest, this modern caravan park, with amenities equal to anything one finds in its counterparts on the continent. The same cannot be said for the industrial and commercial life of Youghal, which has suffered some considerable setbacks over the years. Seafield Fabrics, once the big hope of the town, closed down but was reopened in a worker-managed takeover, one of the few bright spots in a picture which is far from rosy. The hands and skills and energies of the people of Youghal urgently require some internal dynamic to set them to work. New, native Earls of Cork may be needed to make that happen. We've been talking about this rich and rare land, and we have a good deal of richness and rarity where I am right now. They've been making whisky in Middleton for close on 200 years. But about 20 years ago, they built a new distillery in Middleton. So what was to become of the old distillery and the old buildings which had been in service for close on 200 years? They could have demolished them. They could have let them fall into disuse, as happens to so many old buildings, but they didn't do that. Instead, they retained them, and they've turned them now into a brilliant new heritage centre, where they celebrate not just the making of whisky down through the centuries, but they also welcome here literally thousands of tourists from all over Europe, indeed all over the world, year in, year out. The old distillery complex in Middleton started life as a woolen mills. After that, for a brief time, it served as a military barracks during the Napoleonic Wars. But when James Murphy & Co., the brewers of Cork, bought it in 1823, they converted it to a distillery, which is what it remained until, with the help of Foss, it took on the more sober mantle of Heritage Centre, which is what it now is. The distillation process and consequent palatability of Irish whisky is nowhere better celebrated than in Crabs on Old, a poem written by a man away off in County Mayo about the time Middleton Distillery first began to function.
Be you strong landlord, duke, king or grand lord, no pounds nor pennies will line your shroud. Be wise in time then, good grog go find then, and pass the long hours carousing loud.
This is the largest pot still in the world. That now held the wash from which the whisky was distilled. And what did it hold? 32,000 gallons of it.
Mas tír na tíre, duke nu rihu, ní chur for pín lats to dolphin vold. Marshin starvation, níl bart nís crina, na vega shiri a cur crabs on all.
Way back in the early 1850s, there was no such thing as electricity in this or any other part of the world. And so, if there was going to be a distillery here, it had to be powered by water. There is the great water wheel, which was the source of Middleton Distillery's power. So anybody who ever drank a glass of Paddy whisky or Middleton whisky, there's the wheel he has to thank for it. It all started with Uisce Beatha, the water of life, but before the water of life could be made, that water had to bring the power to make it. The guided tour completed, the visitors returned to the centre's lively restaurant, where they're invited to sample the celebrated Irish Uisce Beatha. It's been a fascinating journey, this, but also a tiring one, through the long history of Irish whisky making. A little pick-me-up at the end of it in these congenial surroundings will do none of us any harm. The far longer journey of Irish whisky is celebrated in the murals. New York, Athens, Moscow, Paris, Rome, Copenhagen, Sydney. Over 75 countries around the world now know the taste and flavour of the many brands of our native Uisce Beatha. On the way out, fortified by the spirit of Midleton, one may find the courage to spend a little time and even money in the gift and craft shops and take home a souvenir of a place that has for 200 years been part of this rich and rare land.
John Calloway, you're marketing manager of the Jemison Heritage Centre here in Midleton, and this is the office, is it not, of the old distillery?
That's correct, Liam. This was a very important part of the old distillery because this is where the farmer got paid for his grain when he brought it here to the distillery to sell. And again, a very important place for the distillery worker, because on payday, it's from this room here he got paid from.
That went on for what, from 1825, was it?
From 1825 up until it closed with the opening of the new distillery back in 1975.
So you're talking about a span of...
150 years. 150 years, so rich in history.
What about some of the old founder members of this distillery and of the Irish distillers generally? What about those?
Yeah, actually, we have some pictures on this old office wall here. As you know, Liam, Irish Distillers came about with the merge of the 5 remaining distilleries in Ireland back in 1966. And we have John Jemison from the Jemison Distillery in Dublin. Next to him here is a picture of James Murphy, who was the founder of this distillery here, the old Cork Distilleries Company here in Midleton. Next to James Murphy, we have John Power from the Power's Go Label Distillery in John's Lane in Dublin. And beside John Power is D.E. Williams from the famous Tullamore Dew Distillery in the Midlands.
Well, John, there was a great new merger of Irish distillers generally, which necessitated a whole new approach to whisky production. And that happened in 1974.
In 1974, our new modern complex just opened on this site.
Well, that meant that from then on, effectively, this distillery was out of use.
It was. It just fell into rack and ruin for a number of years. And we're very lucky that it wasn't knocked down, because as you've seen these buildings outside, superb architecture and stonework. It would have been just an awful shame if, I'd say, if it had gone another 2 or 3 years for insurance purposes, they would have to have gone.
Well, as you well know, many of these old buildings were in fact demolished or let fall into disuse. What was the basis of the decision in your case to retain it and to turn it into a heritage centre?
I'll answer that, Liam, with one word: conviction. Conviction by a lot of my colleagues in Irish distillers, both here in Midleton and in head office in Dublin. We have 2 other very successful visitor centres, the Irish Whisky Corner in Dublin and the old Busham Distillery up in Antrim, where we attract 1,000 visitors every year. So this, I think, I have to say, is the jewel of our 3 centres. And it opened only last year, back in 1992. And it was a £2.2 million investment. But I'll say one thing: Irish whisky, we produce the best whisky in the world. I'll go as far as saying that. And the promotion of Irish whisky is ongoing in all markets. But this has been such a successful way to promote it with these visitor centres, where you have the visitor in the palm of your hand to indoctrinate him on that fascinating story of Irish whisky.
Are they coming to you really here now from all over Europe, I suppose, perhaps all over the world?
All over the world. Actually, 30% of our total visitor number last year were in fact Irish themselves. And then next to the Irish came French, coming in at about 19% of our total numbers, followed by Germans, Italians, Spanish. We have representatives from all over the world.
So you could expect then out here in that lovely restaurant of yours to hear any of maybe half a dozen languages spoken.
Oh, and any one day, because one of the highlights of the tour actually is the green